the face of it, China's law on promoting ethnic unity and progress, which went into force on July 1st, sounds rather anodyne. In reality, though, it is being widely seen by its ethnic minorities, particularly Tibetans and Uyghurs, as a weapon to essentially erase their unique cultures. It has provisions that experts think Beijing could use to carry out its repressive policies beyond its borders. To understand the implications of the new law, SAM Conversations and MCR spoke to Aparna Rawal, a Sofia, Bulgaria-based independent researcher and analyst specializing in Afghanistan and Pakistan affairs, counterterrorism, and regional security. She is the co-founder of the Strategic Perspective. Aparna Rawal.
On the face of it, Beijing's law on promoting ethnic unity and progress sounds rather anodyne. However, as you have argued in your piece in South Asia Monitor, it is anything but that. Explain broadly, and then we'll get into the specifics of it.
Well, from what we know, as of July 1st, 2026, China put this law into an effect, the law on promoting ethnic unity and progress. Now, this is something that China has been doing since before the law came into effect. It's been a habit, an experimentation of more than decades, which is now put into a nationwide statute. So what happened was on September 8th, 2025, the law was given as a draft to the Chinese parliament. And that time, as soon as it was submitted, there were some revisions that had to be made on that. And right away, the human rights groups already took an objection to it, because that meant that now China would be having a justified reason of pursuing its habit, of persecuting minorities, ethnic groups. Assimilation means killing off the culture, the tradition, the uniqueness of a particular ethnic group, which was initially something that the CCP promoted. Like post-1949, CCP actually followed a model which was very similar to the Soviet model. And what they did was they recognized the 55 ethnic minority groups. And even on paper, we don't know for sure if it actually happened or didn't happen, but on paper, it was stated that they were going to promote the culture, the language, the development of these ethnic groups. But then the downfall of the Soviet happened. And this was more of a wake-up call for China. And China started looking at this as an example that if the uniqueness of these ethnic groups exist, there will be a chance that it would be a threat to the People's Republic of China. So then they started with this experimentation where assimilation started happening in areas like Xinjiang, where we see this happening in Tibet, in all the 5 different, autonomous groups. Previously, most of these areas, these regional autonomous areas, had some kind of autonomy, but that was completely stopped in, when was it? 2014, when Xi Jinping's party had a conference. They identified this as an issue. And he himself spoke about creating this consciousness of the Chinese state. So this set things in motion, like a first draft kind of a thing where most of these ethnic groups were told that Mandarin would be the basic medium of instruction. And they tried to instill this in Tibet in 2018. They tried doing this in South Mongolia. But however, it did not go so well because there were protests and things didn't go very well. But that did not stop them, because come 2019, they again pushed for it. Now, fast forward to 2025, you have a law that is presented as a draft to the parliament. They accept it. Come December of 2025, there is a new revision made to this law. And the revision is on the standardized spoken and written language for medium of instruction, where they have stopped using any ethnic language as a form of instruction in schools, where Mandarin was going to be mandatory. So now what has happened, when we are looking at this law got passed on July 1st. And Xi Jinping apparently signed this law the same day that it was passed by the parliament too. It was passed by a vote of 276 to 3. And 3 only because there was abstentions. It wasn't because anybody was against it. The whole house was in favor of this law. So it's basically modeled after Xi Jinping's policy on what China should be. And with this in mind, they came up with these core mandates. Interestingly, this is one of the few laws which also has a preamble. Most of the laws do not have a preamble. They have a preamble which clearly states that it's assimilation of different ethnic groups united together under common history, culture, basically coming from the same source. So by doing this, what you're perpetually doing is you're actually getting rid of the uniqueness of these groups by assimilating them under one banner. So this was the main core thing behind it. And the thing with the mandate is, again, it's become a nationwide, legally binding duty. It's not something that the government is encouraging people to do, but it's a legal binding duty on every Chinese citizen, every Chinese institution, whether you are private, whether you're state-owned, whether a religious body, or even military. It's now considered a legally binding duty for people to create the state of common consciousness of what China as a nation should be. So this is one of the core factors behind this. And there are 2 articles in the law which become very problematic. One is the Taiwan clause. So Article 21 of this law, it states that Taiwanese people are basically the people, the citizens of People's Republic of China, which means China has a right on them, and which means that the Chinese parties or organs of the parties are expected to view them as Chinese citizens, which of course does not sit very well with Taiwan. Now, the other clause, which is very problematic, is the extraterritorial law, which has come into place under Article 63, which means that any individual, body, organization that speaks against the ethnic assimilation or against the unity of these ethnic groups, which, according to China, is based on what they deem as assimilation. So anything that goes counter to that, any citizens, bodies, organizations residing abroad, outside the mainland China, can be persecuted. And we know for a fact that on basis of many reports, there has been a lot of transnational repression, even from the Chinese side. There have been more than 100 covert police stations that operate in many different countries, which actually take the reports and try to persecute these citizens. Some people have also been known to go missing. And China has used a lot of different ways to get to these people to return home, a way of form of persuasion of some sorts, or putting pressure on the families of these people living abroad, but who happen to be in China. So these are things that has raised a lot of concern with a lot of human rights groups as well. And of course, Mandarin has become the main language of instruction, which starts from pre-kindergarten all the way to the actual end of education that a person would pursue. Now, the ethnic groups, as far as they are concerned, their languages, we can see that in time, they could start declining. And by doing this, of course, there will be a change in what people perceive China as. And mostly we see this in the Tibetans or the Uyghurs, especially being targeted accordingly. The South Mongolians also are facing something very similar. So there is this problem that is popping up, which is become a massive concern for a lot of people from these ethnic groups. And then one thing that we also worry about is that this new changes that China intends to do, where they are pushing forward the Han majoritarianism, which probably existed side by side the other groups, is going to be definitely overtaking and shaping what China might be. So in this case, even people like the Tibetan government in Dharamshala, India, we will see that there might be some issues with China trying to exert some kind of influence by saying that these are Chinese citizens, and on basis of the extraterritorial laws, we have a right to persecute whoever we can. Already we see that China has already named its own Panchen Lama. It has already claimed its monopoly on Buddhism, and it states that any Lama or the future Dalai Lamas, Panchen Lamas, must be first approved by the Chinese government, not as how they were earlier selected. So they are trying to monopolize religion, they are trying to monopolize culture. And even though there are reports of this transnational repression that every other country has been talking about, the US has been talking about, the United Nations has brought this up, and especially in context to this law, already in July, or was it July? No, maybe a little sooner than that. Two US senators even wrote a letter to China asking them to revoke this law, to stop this law. And I believe that was one of them was Sheldon Whitehouse who had written, and he had asked them, and the other one I can't recall at the moment. But there were two gentlemen who had actually asked to revoke the law. And on basis of the UN also, the former UN watchdogs also made a comment that, this is going to create a problem, especially with the migration and already the persecution that we are seeing of the people. Thing is, if this law comes into place, it justifies what China has been doing for a long time through law. And it's already in place. Now it has become a little more overt about its operations. Initially, it was doing Operation, Fox Hunt, which it claimed to be going after all the people who were involved in embezzlement, frauds, anti-corruption. But everybody knows that most of the people who were arrested or picked up in the hunt, most of them were actually not even embezzlers or fraudsters or scammers in terms of anti-corruption. It was more of a matter of political difference, who China might have deemed as political problems, as we can say it. So the Operation Fox Hunt came into existence in 2014. What accompanied later on was the Operation Skynet. Now, this was the quick recovery of all the fugitives that China had deemed. So this had already started happening before the law came into place. This is more of a justified way and a very blatant move by China to show its dominance in some areas. And the worst part is that it also violates many international laws. The UN Charter, though it recognizes sovereignty of different countries, it also doesn't have jurisdiction in most nations. It comes from collective responsibility, making pressures from various countries. But China clearly disregards the sovereignty of other nations and the jurisdiction of other nations. Because if you're going to carry out, extraterritorial transnational repression on another person's soil, then it clearly indicates the disregard for somebody's sovereignty, which means that other nations who are hosting refugees from China have to be extra cautious in protecting the same refugees you're hosting, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in India. We all have to take a collective effort to protect these refugees who are trying to evade being captured. And we know also for a fact that China has slapped a lot of red notices to extradite many of these refugees back home. So this is also going on at this point. So with these new developments and new laws in place, it is a very worrisome thing for human rights violations also, and for what would be the plight of these ethnic groups, which China is claiming to be some kind of assimilation, unity driven, program. So that's the basic gist of it.
I have specifics in terms of, you talked about Article 63.
Yes.
It will inevitably run into sovereign jurisdictions unless China chooses to do in a very covert, sneaky fashion. I mean, they cannot officially reach out to a government and say, this is our law, we want to repress this. They
Right.
will have to do it in a sneaky fashion. Do you see a problem where, because of the very nature of what they are trying to do, it will automatically be limited in its impact?
To be very honest, I think China has been doing this even before it pushed out a law. And most nations have been very, very aware of this. For example, there was a report by the FBI in 2008 when they did the Beijing Olympics. They did the torch run in San Francisco, I think. Yeah. So during this time, there were personnel from the Chinese diplomatic board. They were directing buses and buses of Chinese students to go and counter a pro Tibetan rally which was happening. And this was specifically mentioned in many open sources also, that, this has already been done. Like, this is like transnational mobilization already on the move. So they have done that. And not only that, there are a lot of cases where a lot of American Chinese, or if you have other people who have acquired citizenship of another country but had Chinese origins, if they return to China, they have been detained in China and not allowed to move. There was a perfect case of this American Chinese lady who traveled to China with her 16-year-old daughter. It was in 2017. And she was detained because the government was pressuring her to bring her father, who was a Chinese citizen, back to China. And she was stuck in China until 2021. Only then she was allowed to go because there was some kind of a clearance and some kind of an intervention that possibly may have happened. But what doesn't change also is that China in Xinjiang area also has come up with this, Xinjiang as well as Tibet, to be very honest. They have come up with this grid surveillance, where grids are formed, the areas are marked in such a way where there are these personnel who keep tabs on families in various areas. And then there's certain kind of a punitive action which may be taken place. There have been already, there's a bit of a change in terms of religion also that we are seeing. Like, churches are not allowed to have crosses. Then mosques have been demolished. I mean, there have been more than 12,000 mosques that have been demolished that they talk about. But that is just because we know about that number. That's an estimate. We don't know for a fact exactly how much that has happened. Plus, they have been doing this forced labor in China, getting these citizens of these ethnic areas to work in semiconductor factories, in different kinds of areas. The different factories that they try to get them into. And they're saying that it is done with the intention of helping these ethnic groups. They're saying that this is China's counter, where China is saying that it's being done to increase the economy of these areas. And it has improved at least 3 times than before, like by 3% or whatever. So they're saying it's not forced labor. However, human rights activists and even UN has clearly said that that's not true. They're countering everything what the world is saying. Plus, the UN itself has stated very clearly that by putting this law into effect, China is going to violate at least 12 of the human rights agreement that it has already signed. So it is contradicting itself too. But we also know that with the clause of Taiwan, we know what China is thinking. Now they're going to extend this thing into China, into Taiwan, stating Taiwan is a part of People's Republic of China. Hence, we have a right to carry out any kind of jurisdiction out there or any kind of a law out there. Similar thing is also being seen in Hong Kong. A lot of people from Hong Kong are also facing that.
Yeah. How do you see it in the context of India? Is India suitably aware of the implications of the new law? Because I haven't seen or heard anything out of New Delhi which would indicate that they are even focusing on this.
I think the responsibility of the Tibetan government, the Americans are also very much, keeping tabs of what's going on in
So
Dharamshala.
is
And so
Europe in a major way.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear you.
I just saw there has been a lot of pushback out of Europe as well against this law.
Oh, yes, definitely. Because the problem is not just in terms of these ethnic groups. The problem is that every sovereign country's soil is going to be exploited. And this clearly shows the disregard for the other sovereigns that are recognized countries. China cannot pull out its jurisdiction in other countries. I mean, as the UN Charter also suggests very, very clearly, that no country has a right to interfere in another country. I mean, there are clauses, but you cannot be intervening or doing things, where you disregard the sovereignty of a nation. So this is something that I think every nation is going to be worried about, because China has already carried out transnational repressions in at least 120 countries. At least. That's what everybody has been talking about.
Yeah.
And also,
sorry to interrupt. I mean, I'm very interested in your view on how you think New Delhi has handled it, because there seems to be a measure of diffidence when it comes to these issues. Do you see that New Delhi is sensitive to the implications of what has happened as of July 1st?
I'm pretty sure that New Delhi is very well aware. Maybe we haven't heard from them now. Maybe in the coming months or sooner or later, we will hear about it. Because it doesn't change the fact that the Tibetan government exists in Dharamshala on the Indian soil. This is not a matter of Tibet. It's not a matter of Tibetan people. This is also a matter for the Indian citizens and for the sovereignty of our nation. So I think this is a problem that will not be overlooked. It's true that at the moment, nobody has spoken heavily on it or spoken on it, but I'm pretty sure New Delhi is very aware of what is happening. So it's only a matter of time when people react.
Right.
Yes.
Historically, I don't think people realize, but historically, China has always given to itself the role of civilizing barbarians outside its borders. Yes. I mean, it has historically seen non-Chinese people as barbarians. So I suppose this is just a sort of a tool in that direction.
Actually, it's interesting you bring this up, because what China has been trying to do, it's been trying to run its mouth and run its own narrative. And which is why the more it pushes its own narrative, it's trying to control the history of the country. So the more they push it out, they think the Han people were far more civilized by the Tibetans, who were following different kinds of rituals and things like that. Plus, let's not forget, even though China continues to push the history in a certain way in terms of civilizing the uncivilized, it was China whose cultural revolution, even the Great Leap Forward, was a major reason why people from Xinjiang and even the Kazakhs who were living in Xinjiang actually made a run for it. They tried to leave the country precisely because of that, even though China talks about civilizing people, because at the end of the day, there were more than 60,000 to 100 Kazakhs and Uyghurs who tried to leave the country. So everybody is well aware of that, regardless of what other narratives might be. But we know for a fact they are trying to gain a complete monopoly on the history by discrediting the history that the Tibetans offer about themselves and putting their own narrative about what the history of Tibet is. They are trying to get some kind of a legitimacy, not only on their identity, but on their history, their background, culture. And slowly we might see, if we do not put up a stop to this, there is going to be a possibility that most of these languages are going to die away. So
Right.
what remains in the end would be what China offers, the idea of the conscious,
Yeah.
consciousness of the Chinese nation. This is what
Right.
they're calling it, the common consciousness. Yes.
Yeah, but Tibetans see this as China really hurrying up the erasure of their culture and from every angle. You've also quoted Penpa Shering, and so have I, calling it sort of a legislating genocide.
Yes.
But it's amazing that they will probably get away with it. I don't know if there is going to be any significant moderation of their behavior once the law is in place.
Yes. Because this is the second generation revision of the previous practice they had tried out.
Right.
So, if anything, they're getting far more bolder in their attempts.
Yeah.
But nothing has really changed as much, except for the fact that now they are very vocal about what they're doing. Initially, there was some kind of a deniability.
Right.
It does not change. But here's another scary part about this law is that anybody living abroad can report at any of the police stations, these covert police services existing in all these different countries. They can report about any person, and this is getting forwarded to the mainland China. So what follows later, it's very hard to tell how China would act.
And you mean
Yes.
any person of any country, any ethnicity, any citizenship? It could be anyone, right?
Okay, so here's the thing. This is the part that does not really get cleared. The translations that we get from the Chinese law, if you read it in Chinese, it is very different. Like, it is very focused. It's using very strong words, which is very nationalistic in some ways and very similar to the CCP ideology, which Xi Jinping has again, revived. But the English version, somewhere we feel like it's getting diluted.
I see.
Things are lost. It's kind of softened up. So this becomes a bit of a difficulty understanding how things are moving also. And what was I going to say? I'm sorry.
No, one particular aspect that jumped out at me from your piece, you have mentioned the concept of, and I hope I'm pronouncing the word right, Zhudao, which is
Zongha.
forging or casting. That's the term you use.
Yeah.
Now, is that a specific usage in the law that you're talking
Yes,
about?
it's actually mentioned in the documents. They have a whole glossary on the words that they're using.
I see.
The Chinese consciousness, what it means. And the preamble of this law clearly states that all these ethnic groups are basically coming from the same background, sharing a history of more than 5,000 years. So by putting this in the Constitution, you're clearly, pushing forward your own narrative.
Right.
You're changing the history of these other countries, of these other ethnic groups. Because Xinjiang has its own uniqueness too, because majority are Muslims. They were not Chinese, they were not Han Chinese, they were Turkic-speaking Muslims. So it's completely different from what Han China is. And
Right.
Han China is now trying to assimilate these people, re-educate these people. There was a very interesting books that were written by some of these Uyghur refugees, where they talk about these re-education camps that were done. And these re-education camps, from a piece that I read a long time ago, they talk about being so big as football fields, where these people don't have a choice. They call it the vocational training. They get them there and they re-educate these people on how to be proper. That kind of answers your question about civilizing the uncivilized.
Just last couple of things, Aparna. One is, of course, this is a subject I haven't really thought through, but it's been occurring to me for a while, especially after the enactment of the law, and that's to do with China's dramatic rise as an AI power, artificial intelligence power, that could lend itself quite powerfully to some of the provisions of the law, don't you think?
Absolutely, you pointed out a very important point, even in the law, because what we have noticed before the law came into power, these people have been doing a surveillance to such an extent. They have been using AI, they've been using hacking, and they have been using doxing just to pressure people, to change things, to change narratives, disinformation. Not only that, now they have surveillance system called IJOP, if I'm not mistaken. What they do is they even do surveillance with the DNA of a person, facial recognition. So with so many things changing, who knows to what extent it's going to violate, human rights. And we don't know to what extent we will be able to counter it too, because they have a plan. Now
And we
they have put decades, years of experimentation finally into some kind of a judicial statute. And they're blatant about it. They're very bold about it. Yes.
The irony, Aparna, here is I was reading just this morning, there was a major AI conference which Xi Jinping inaugurated. And this is what he said. And I find it rather ironic that on the one hand, you're doing what you're doing. On the other, you're publicly saying this, and I'm quoting him now. He says AI development should not be a solo performance by a single country, but a symphony of international cooperation, ready to work
Right.
with all parties to seize the opportunities of AI. China is ready to do. Now, that sounds wonderful, right? This
Yes.
particular expression, a symphony of international cooperation, how does it square with the law that you've just enacted?
The thing is, it sounds very good if everybody comes together, but we don't have AI laws in place yet. It's too
Right.
soon for us and for other nations to actually bank on the words of completely utopian ideology without having some kind of jurisdiction in place which can protect the citizens of our own nation. So, yes, it sounds great, whatever he's saying. But except for his allies, I'm not really sure how the other countries who are trying to counter China would feel about it.
Interestingly, to before I let you go, Xi's and historically China's focus has been what they call harmony. Now, again, harmony sounds very nice. It's lovely. What's wrong with having a harmonious country or a society or a civilization? But it hides so much else that people don't talk about, right? How do you achieve that harmony? So that's something I've always focused on when it comes to China.
That's absolutely true, because if you think about it, you can't sweeten poison and present it as honey. Even though it might taste sweet, it's sooner or later going to kill you, regardless. Yes. So I think we have to take China with a pinch of salt. They're very ambitious, no doubt. But at the end of the day, their ambition is causing a lot of problems for a lot of different nations. And their
Indeed,
complete
indeed.
disregard, especially for the sovereignty of other nations, is something that we cannot overlook. They did that to their own people. They're going to do that to other people. It doesn't matter.
Right,
So,
right.
and we can also see this in the South China Sea also. They might create some kind of bigger issues.
Right.